Hi, my name is Olav Dirkmaat. We are at UFM, Universidad Fransisco Marroquín in Guatemala. And it's my great pleasure to introduce Tyler Cowen. He's the latest recipient of an honorary doctorate at the UFM. And Tyler Cowen is one of the most prolific economists of our time. He is professor at George Mason University. He is co-founder of the Marginal Revolution blog, which we're going to ask about in a moment. He's a longtime Bloomberg columnist and a host of Conversations with Tyler. He has written over a dozen books, including The Great Stagnation, Big Business. We'll talk about many of your books right now, and Talent, and many others that we will mention during our conversation. He's a defender of free markets, original thinker, and a fierce advocate of reason and common sense. Welcome, Tyler.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
How is Guatemala treating you, first of all?
This is my fourth visit. It's been wonderful. I see so many signs of economic progress. People seem really pretty happy, and the city is safer, and just the overall vibe is much more positive, so I'm very impressed.
Why do you think they're happier? And happier as before, or happier than in other countries?
There's general evidence that people in Latin American countries are more efficient at converting money into happiness. Is this maybe the cultural notion of pride, or because families tend to be fairly tight, or something about the structure of socializations? Often the distances between you and the people you love are not so great. So maybe all of those factors, and there's just less life pressure here in some ways, say, compared to parts of East Asia. So maybe it's not in every way a good thing that people are happy, right? It may hold back progress in some regards. But nonetheless, it's striking to me how strong the social ties are in Guatemala.
It is, yeah. And there's also early risers, right? They wake up at 4 a.m. to go to work. So maybe working and being happy go together as well. So I'm just stunned because you have so many interests and you've written on so many topics over your lifetime. And I'm sure plenty other topics will follow. What do you think about this debate on expert knowledge and being a generalist? So in these terms, you might come off more as a generalist. What do you think about economists maybe that focus on one subject and try to become an expert in that? I mean, Paul Krugman maybe, like on trade.
Well, he's become a generalist as well, of a sort. In a sense, there are no generalists. The generalists, those who are called that, they're people who specialize in being a generalist, and that's what they can do. And it's hard for them to do other things well, just like it's hard for the specialists to switch. So in that sense, there may be less of a difference. But the generalist has the advantage of being able to bring different kinds of knowledge to bear on an argument, especially for big picture thinking. That's often an advantage. It's an advantage for speaking to public audiences and for making economic ideas persuasive. It definitely has disadvantages. So the notion that you sit, in the chair for 3 years and work very hard on a single empirical measurement, which then becomes the definitive account of some policy issue, you're probably not going to end up being able to do that. So there's division of labor, of course, and the generalists and the specialists work together, and it's turned out fairly well.
And in economics and politics, do we need more specialists or more generalists? Because they have this bigger picture kind of view of how the world works.
I think in the United States, at least, we have too many specialists. That the incentives are to produce material that can be peer-reviewed and is highly defensible. That is, it can't be criticized too much. The incentive for originality is a bit weaker. So there are a great number of economists where their work is very high quality, but you just ask them questions about the world and they're not all that impressive. And that's always seemed somehow wrong to me, that if you're in a university, it's your personal responsibility to think very hard and deeply about a wide range of issues.
Yeah, not just your subject, but also where your subject belongs, I guess. You've written a column a while back on how a university should be. I don't know if you remember.
Of course I remember.
You remember? So what would the ideal university look like, and how would it be different from the current university system in the US, for instance, and the incentives that they produce for producing this like very specialist and narrow work?
I wrote that column some while ago. I suggested that we abolish tenure, make it more of a competitive market, and that also the people teaching and the people who grade the exams are two different sets of individuals. So a student would be given a great amount of freedom, but they would have to pass the exams. And the way things work today, at least in the United States, well, the professor doesn't want to flunk too many students. It means trouble with administration or with the students or with the parents. So you set things up so everyone can pass. And that's easier, but it's a bad incentive. with separate grading, it's more like a formal exam system. More stressful, to be sure, but you actually have to learn things, and then let students learn things in many different ways. If I wrote that column today, much more of it would be about artificial intelligence, but at the time that was not so powerful. And I think probably a third of what we do, we should have teaching replaced by learning from AIs, and that would be another improvement we could make. But it would be up to the students. Right. The teachers and the AIs would compete, and we'd see which classes the students would sign up for.
Right. So we'll talk more about artificial intelligence in a while, but is there value in grading? Because there's also movements in the US in education that oppose grading and says it produces precisely the wrong incentives in education. Would you disagree with that view?
I think it depends on the school and the student. So if you're Harvard or Stanford and the average is an A- and most people are just getting A's, I think that's fine. The class is sufficiently pre-selected that in fact most of them deserve A's because they're exceptional. So that's in a way like not having grades, and I wouldn't object to that. But you go to a typical state university, which might have 20, 30, 40,000 people, and the range of quality is vast, and there's so many students, individual professors really cannot be monitoring that many of them. And then I think grades are quite important, but we're right now not doing them well. We set things up just to try to pass people and get them through.
Well, talking about academics, university, and professors, one of them being yourself, some have become famous over time. And I know you wrote about the economics of fame. So first question, are you famous now, Tyler?
If I'm in like New York City or London or Washington, like on most days, someone will stop me and recognize me. So I guess that means I'm some kind of famous.
Is it like a threshold for famous? What's the definition of fame in this sense? Just recognition?
I was talking with Fareed Zakaria. He's on TV on CNN. And he says if he's in an airport for half an hour, 10 people will recognize him and come up. That's like very famous. I'm some sort of intermediate level where I mostly still have my privacy. But in fact, if I'm out in public, I am more or less assuming someone might be watching. And it's a very different kind of life. I'm not saying I would otherwise be doing very weird things, but you don't quite have your life to yourself anymore either.
Right. In this area of globalization, fame has also gone international. Like we have this winner takes all effect. I mean, I show your videos to my students, and that wouldn't have been possible 20, 30, 50, or 80 years ago. So how does globalization, new technologies shape our idea of fame and being famous? Has the economics of fame changed?
Well, I've thought it's important to be on as many major platforms as one can. So I have a YouTube channel, MR University. I have a blog. I'm on Twitter. There's more one could do, but obviously energies and time and attention are limited. I have a podcast. So there's a sort of full service range of products depending on what people want. And I learn different things from doing each of them. And I find any one of them that I do, it increases my ability to do the others because I get different perspectives on issues. So I think more people should do that, be out there on YouTube, wherever.
Has the world become fairer in that sense or less fair?
I don't know if it's fair. There's what's called a power law on most social media. Right. That is, you're either very well known or you're not well known at all. And you could be like 5% better than some other person and 300% better known. That's not per se fair, but it's fair in the sense that anyone can try. And if your content is good, you'll be well known. I'm friends with Kyla Scanlon. She's a woman from Kentucky who just started doing videos, and they're great, and she knows a lot of economics, and now she's famous. So she didn't go to Harvard or come from a wealthy family, but for her it worked.
Yeah, there's many examples of people taking those increased opportunities. And on your way to fame, I guess, you started Marginal Revolution together with Alex Tabarrok. What is Marginal Revolution? So where did it come from? And what is surprising to me is it has gone on for so long. When did it start?
It's now, I think, over 22 years old. And I've blogged on Marginal Revolution every single day for those 22 years, wow, including my days in Guatemala and tomorrow and when I'm flying. And you can arrange posts, writings in advance. And at the time, I thought there was a gap in quality communication of economic ideas to the public. And Alex and I just decided we would do it, started it more or less on a lark, and it's gone very well for us, so we've just kept on going. Most days we would have up to 100,000 readers from how we can measure it, which is imperfect, but it's a lot of people. And we have very high quality readers. So I always say to myself, like, why should I stop doing this? And I don't.
Right. What's the secret? Just being consistent? Is that what led to the reach it has today?
I don't feel I know the secret. If I knew the secret, I or someone else could just say it and many people could do it. I think maybe the secret is some extreme stubbornness and perseverance where you're actually obsessive and have just decided not to care about a bunch of other things. And that's why it's hard for other people to copy. There is something hard about it that doesn't feel hard to me as the person doing it. So I'm in a way the worst person to ask, what is the secret?
So we've talked a bit about winner-take-all effects, globalization, these new platforms, technologies that allow people that would have been famous are now famous. You wrote a book actually on defense of commercial culture or marketing culture, and I think your argument was something in well, let's take music. 100 years ago, the market for music was very limited. To be able to produce music and have a market where to sell your music was very difficult. Nowadays, anybody in their own home can build an own studio and record the music and upload it to SoundCloud or Spotify and access millions, if not billions of people. But there's also another line of argument where people say we're in stuck culture. I'm not sure if you've heard the term,
of course,
but
Ted Gioia has pushed this line.
So we're rehashing like movies, art, songs, and even like architecture and art are like an insult to craftsmanship. You're yourself right, I think, in the complacent class. I'm just going to quote you: millennials as a generation just don't seem that interested in grand projects. So what happened between stock culture and commercial culture, like giving all those opportunities to many people who weren't able to take these opportunities before?
That's a very big question, and it covers many topics. I would say if you look at popular music, maybe it did peak in the West in the 1960s and 1970s, but it's a mistake to think that it all just ended then. So like rap music in recent times arguably has been at an all-time peak. Many forms of electronica have been at an all-time peak. Taylor Swift is not my favorite, personally, but she inspires such loyalty. Her tour has been such an event. Many very smart people just love what she does. Country and Western music is going very strong. So there's always opportunities for this creativity. One needs to realize it may or may not match to your personal preference, but just the number of different and diverse musical genres you can consume. A lot of the best work is new. If you look at classical music, the number of pianists or violinists who can play a truly world-class performance that would have been the best ever, say in 1960. That's much higher today than ever before. And you go to a Mozart composition on YouTube, like how many people have listened to this? And it can easily be 10 million people or more, and none of this is dead. So inspiration continues. It will always take different forms. And part of enjoying culture is learning how to appreciate that diversity. Latino music also,
Right, reggaeton.
Yeah, I mean, you could say, well, that was 10 years ago. But look, not everything has happened in the last week. And there's just a successive series of changing genres that develop new peaks.
If we look at commercial culture, something that strikes me, they show these images of like city benches or light posts or lamps or whatever, and they're like beautifully decorated from the 19th century or beginning 20th century, and then they show like the modern style, like benches, public benches and lamp posts, and it just look like very basic, right? So this idea of stock culture versus commercial culture, I'm not sure if it dumps down a lot of these things that were crafts before. Is this inherent to capitalism or just bad taste of consumers?
Well, some of it is clearly bad taste. But again, keep in mind, the peaks are in changing genres. So if you look at interiors, which is where you actually have to live, interiors today are far better than in any of these earlier eras. Just try sitting on a sofa from 1920, and it's horrible. The light, the wall space. There's so many truly gorgeous modern or contemporary homes all over the world in a way that is unparalleled. So it's true we don't have these beautiful town centers the way you might say Antigua would be an example of. That's a great shame. You still can see them, of course, to some degree, but we've excelled in many other areas.
Well, talking about culture, and we know that at least this government is right now trying to put a 100% tariff on foreign-produced movies. Talking about tariffs, we have a lot of discussion right now about tariffs. Is it the most pressing issue in the US right now? Is it the biggest threat to global prosperity? Or are we just talking about tariffs and forgetting about other important topics? What is your view on this?
Well, I would say tariffs are one manifestation of what I view as the biggest threat, and that is having a highly unpredictable president who does not respect the Constitution or the rule of law. And given that fact, tariffs are one of the very bad things he does. But I don't think tariffs are the fundamental danger. The fundamental danger is the quality of governance is right now quite low. Many things are done randomly or shooting from the hip, or to try to penalize enemies or to reward family members. And that's really just terrible. That's the biggest threat. And the US is still the world's most powerful and richest country. So if we are poorly governed, that's bad news for everyone, including Guatemala, also the Netherlands, your place of birth.
Right. Thanks for reminding. But so Trump is maybe a reaction to what has been happening over 20 years in the US. You also talked about like this kind of like stagnation. We'll get into that later. But what has happened in the past 20, 25 years that led us to a Trump administration that might be very volatile, very unpredictable, and sometimes even on the border of not respecting the rule of law or even violating it?
I think a number of just factual events put people in a bad mood. One would be the great financial crisis. Another would be the COVID epidemic. But on top of that, the Democratic Party and the left, they way over-invested in some very unpopular ideas. Woke would be the best known of those, but also a complete unwillingness to think about immigration policy critically. I'm myself quite pro-immigration, but I do realize you can't just not think about the border. You need some kind of coherence and predictability to border policy. Those have been two of Trump's main issues. We had a high rate of inflation for a while under Biden. And then finally, the Democrats ended up with three candidates, first Hillary Clinton, then Joe Biden, replaced by Kamala Harris, who are just terrible candidates in terms of how they do on TV, or do they seem warm to people. Maybe those are superficial factors, but they really matter when you want to win. And Trump was just much more effective in communicating and being on television. And for that stack of reasons and a bunch more, Trump has won twice.
Right. So talking about immigration, we economists always talk about the benefits of immigration, economic benefits, which are clearly existing on a broader level. But is culture a thing with immigration? Do you think it's a decisive factor, or is it something that self-corrects over time, or something that we shouldn't be worried about, the culture that immigrants bring to a new country?
I think a country has to worry about this very carefully and with a lot of forethought, and especially very small countries easily can be overwhelmed. But if you look at the United States, we're quite populous already. Our fertility rate is not quite high enough, so without immigrants we'll lose population. Immigrants from Latin America in particular, they're almost always Christian in background, or if not Christian, some kind of syncretic, Christian, pagan, indigenous tradition. And that works fine in the United States. It's not a problem in the sense that, say, Islam can be a problem in some European countries. So the US needs immigrants. I think we're quite lucky to have Latin America as our proximate neighbor, most of all Mexico, but Guatemala is, pretty close behind. And there are problems, but I would just say we need to make it work. But in part, you make it work by emphasizing legal rather than illegal immigration, and give people a stake in the system and a predictable status, and actually enforce the laws you have, but try to take in as many people as you can in a way that is consistent with rule of law.
There's some interesting facts on immigration. I think people are worried about crime a lot. It results that an immigrant, especially an illegal immigrant, even though I completely agree with the legal immigration debate, commit less crimes than, for instance, people that have been living in the US or are native to the US. But there's also other facts, like Guatemalan immigrants. I think they vote like 80, 90% to the left. So
that has changed, though. We don't have exact figures on this, but Trump is very popular with Latinos.
Cubans and Venezuelans.
Yeah, but not only. And by some measures, he's approaching 50% of the Latino vote. It's hard to measure who exactly is Latino. And with self-reporting, as Latinos assimilate, they tend to just start calling themselves American or white. And those are many of the ones who might be voting for Trump. So politically, it's now pretty balanced, and I think that's gone fine. I don't actually want them to vote for Trump, or the Democratic Party for that matter. But I no longer have this worry that all these people will come in and just vote for one side. That becomes unhealthy and politicized.
Right. So you wrote a book on big business, which is very interesting. In Guatemala, not sure if you noticed, but when people talk about a businessman or entrepreneur, they tend to think about big business. And it has a bad reputation in Guatemala. If you say small business owner, which is comerciante in Guatemala, it has a great type of social standing. You wrote a book on big business, so why write a defense of big business? Why was it necessary? And why defend something that's often viewed as villain in politics and academia, and most people try to avoid the subject?
Well, I got tired of hearing all the criticisms, and I wrote the book when Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren were at their peak. There was the danger we would break up our tech companies, which still might happen. Businessmen were vilified. And when I was quite young, I was very influenced by Ayn Rand and her book, Capitalism, the Unknown Ideal. So I thought someone should do an updated version of that. And that's the book I set out to write, showing, well, big business, it typically gives you better service, better products, lower prices, and it pays its workers higher wages. It's far from perfect, but if you judge it morally, it does not appear to measure as worse than, say, individual human beings. So you could say, well, my boss lies to me, but if you look at data, like how many workers lying on their resumes, that's at least as high a number. So I'm not at all saying big business is morally perfect. It should have stronger ethical guidelines. But compared to human beings in general, I think big business is looking pretty good.
It could be more moral, or
it could
better
be
moral standing than an individual.
To buy something at Walmart or from Amazon or Uber now, it's one of the most predictable experiences you can have, in a good way, in the entire world.
So the idea in Guatemala is basically that big business buys political influence. Do you take that point? I guess you written somewhere about it. Not sure if it's in the book. So what do you think about this idea about big business controlling politics, which is a very big idea in Guatemala?
It can be true and it can be bad. I would just say right now with Trump, I wish big business were in charge. We wouldn't have all this threat of tariffs. And you have to ask, well, compared to what? There are plenty of cases where big business lobbies for a subsidy or a tariff for itself. Typically, I would find that objectionable. Right. But in general, countries with strong, prosperous businesses have better governance, and the influence can be quite positive.
Right.
Big business in my country also is typically pro-immigration, not uncritically so, but actually wanting workers and potential customers to come into this country, and that too is a positive influence.
So it's not the big villain they made out of it?
Not at all the big villain. I call it an anti-hero in my book. That's the subtitle.
Any suggestions for the Guatemalans looking at this video and big business in Guatemala?
Well, at first you need bigger businesses, but what's striking to me, having just visited El Salvador, you're of course a much more populous country. You have over 18 million people, and El Salvador is a little over 6 million. So you have much more scale here. And I think that's one reason behind recent Guatemalan successes. You just can operate with more stuff. You have larger markets, more talent, more opportunities, and that all relates to big business as well.
Okay, let's go to artificial intelligence, which I guess many big businesses are in risk of becoming smaller businesses due to artificial intelligence. So you're optimistic about artificial intelligence? Do you think, what will the role of, it's already changing the world, but what will the role be in our world and in academia specifically?
It's fair to call me optimistic, but you could also say I'm realistic.
Right.
My views are not based on predictions, they're based on reality today. So it's hard to predict the future of AI, but in academia, it's already the case. It can answer questions about economics better than I can. It's cheaper than I am. It's available 24/7. It's infinitely patient. It knows all major and some minor languages. Soon it will be able to draw quite good graphs. Right now that function is still imperfect, but it's coming. And how will students use that? How will professors use it? How much will it replace us? I'm really not sure. I think we'll always need humans guiding and inspiring the students. But my goodness, we've invented, like this box, much better than textbooks. And there aren't really limits to what it can do over time. It's getting better at a rapid pace. Quality is improving. And for students, often it's fun. You can ask it, oh, teach me economic principles, but using the lyrics of a rap song or a poem, or in Spanish, in Mayan, whatever, and it just does it. That to me is incredible. I'm not sure how we're going to use that.
I was thinking about
but I know we will. People do already.
I was thinking about the Marginal Revolution videos on YouTube. I mean, we could change it and put a very nice lady in bikini giving the same theories and ideas about economics in a different format, no? So
we're already using AI to generate the visuals. And I've tasked my team with learning more about it. They're very good. The problem, if you'd call it that, is the progress is so fast, you have to keep on learning and it keeps you busy. But that's a sign of just how important it will be.
So what about language? Because your videos are in English. I show them with subtitles. Our students speak English, but I show them with Spanish subtitles, which is getting better over the past few years in an enormous pace. But is it still worth it to learn a language, given that AI basically replaces like a personal translator like next to you? Instead of hiring a person, you can just use your phone for the same at a low cost?
Well, I think it's more important, maybe not for everyone, but AI means we're richer, right? And it means we have more leisure time. So I can do something like go to Guatemala, and my wife and I, we took this trip to Atitlan, away from the people here who are helping us and who all have great English, and just get by without any real problems. People there don't speak that much English for the most part, and you can ask questions, order food, have conversations about what's going on. And the richness of those interactions, the machine cannot give you. And that at least should rise in importance. I hope it does. So yeah, I think languages should be rising in focality.
So talking about AI, advanced AI specifically, maybe a more philosophical question. I guess Hayek, one way or another, talked about human intelligence as a absorbing barrier, like a limit, like an upper limit for technology. I'm not sure if I'm putting words, paraphrasing wrong, Hayek, but do you think we could get an AI that's actually smarter and more capable than a human being, especially like the part of creativity? What is creativity? Can AI replicate that?
I think it's quite easy for AIs to be creative. You hear it said so many times that they're not creative. It's just wrong. We need the cost of electricity to fall a bit, or what's called the cost of tokens. But basically, you can ask an AI to generate hundreds of millions of ideas over the weekend, and it gets busy at work, and then have another AI grade them for correctness and originality. And yeah, most of them are not original. Most human thoughts are not original. But at the end of that process, you'll have a bunch of new and interesting ideas, and we'll be doing this at scale within a year or two. So AIs absolutely are on the verge of being highly original, and there's nothing stopping them from taking that next step.
If I've been listening correctly to you, you have the Singularity Movement as well that thinks that we're going to eradicate scarcity through technology. You say, of course, electricity and energy are a limiting factor.
Right, and really a significant limiting factor, because increasing the supply of energy, it can be polluting, it can involve, land rights in complicated ways. It's just expensive, the stuff. There's a lot of geopolitical issues behind who's supplying the energy. So I don't think we're headed for paradise anytime soon. Energy being only one of several constraints. Human irrationality would be another. So I'm not a member of the Singularity Movement. I think they overrate how much the extreme smarts of AI will do for us. But I don't doubt the extreme smarts.
Interesting. So it's a very Elon Musk kind of view, I guess, who's very optimistic about AI as well.
But he has this other weird view. There's a 15% chance it will kill us all.
That's a view you don't agree with.
No, I think as long as you do it through markets, market incentives are to develop what I would call peaceful cooperative AIs. They too will not be perfect. Like electricity kills people each year, cars, airplanes, go on down the list. There's dangers with all of these, and I'm sure AI will join that category. But the notion that it's this one super intelligent beast that just does us in, there's just not any actual evidence for that fear.
Let's go to another book on talent that you wrote. Published when?
Oh, 3 years ago, I think, with Daniel Gross, yes.
So what's the main message of that book? What's the main point of that book?
That talent is an important and underrated idea, and that if you think about mobilizing talent as the fundamental task of mankind, all your ventures can do better. You can do better yourself. There are ways you can evaluate people who come to you for a job or scholarship and give it to the more efficacious person. And we try to teach people how to do that. Daniel himself has been a venture capitalist most of his life, and he's an expert in, among other things, talent.
So we talk about like elite talent and this idea of like superstars, I guess. Did your ideas and your work on AI change anything about what you did at the time with that book? I mean, it's been a few years, but the change of technology is enormous.
Well, when evaluating talent, you really need to ask all the more this question: is the person good at working with AI? And if they're not, they're going to have a hard time doing well. And IQ alone doesn't get you there. You need to be mentally flexible in a very particular kind of way. It's almost a bit like training a dog or training a horse. Like, smarts help you, but simply being smart doesn't mean you're good at it. And I think we're going to invert a lot of the intellectual hierarchies, that the people who are good with the AI will be more important thinkers, doers, writers than the people who are just born very smart.
So at the beginning of our conversation, we actually talked a little bit about university and what the future university should look like. Is that why you said that universities should train people to use AI much more than they do nowadays?
I think at least a third of the curriculum should only be training with AI, and then the AI can teach you everything else. So how to judge when it is making an error, how to ask it questions the right way, what are the properties of different models, how to think about how AIs might be advancing, all these things you can teach. Students right now are teaching themselves, and they often teach themselves by using AI to cheat. That's not an optimal arrangement. We ought to just teach them more explicitly and say, hey, here's the stuff. We're going to let you do what we used to call cheating, but we want to see how well you can do it. How good a paper can you produce, you and the AI working together? That's what the actual world is going to judge you on.
Right. 1/3 of all the contents and curriculum on AI sounds like a great idea, but it sounds like an idea with a lot of resistance from the university establishment. How do you think it will fold? It will come about over the coming years in that sense? Will we have changes that radical?
No one really wants to do it except for me. I hope some people here do. It probably won't happen first in our universities. People will do it on their own, and the demand for universities will decline because you can get this cheaper version on your own if you're a self-starter. But very slowly, the students all using it is going to matter, and we'll end up with this funny world where the students will be teaching the faculty when it should be the other way around. That's right. The great irony of it all. Students know much more about it than their teachers do.
Let's talk about like economic stagnation, because there might be something here. You used the word in the book on stubborn attachments, and I think you've called for ethical growth as a moral imperative. I think you actually used the term common sense morality. No?
That's right.
What is common sense morality?
Common sense morality is what, for instance, your grandmother might tell you. Well, save money, work hard, have a family, be loyal to your friends and family. That's common sense morality. And it's mostly correct. Maybe there's exceptions to it, but as rules of thumb, it's very good. And one of the things I try to argue in that book is that economic growth and common sense morality are largely consistent. So whether you believe in economic logic or just common sense morality, you actually can end up with the same general, like, pro-capitalist, pro-democracy views.
There's actually this idea about some people, some groups in the US that apply morality over, how do you say, is people you don't know versus like inner circles, like family, friends, like this kind of like hierarchy of social relations, and
right.
People prioritize the world over family ties, for instance, and then other groups of people go from the inside to the outside. They give a higher moral standing to their circles nearby, family, friends, communities, local community, church, and then the world as the last. Is there something with the idea? Do you agree with the ramifications of this difference between certain groups with political preferences in the US? Or?
Well, I think here we need to bring in Hayek, Mises, and the Austrians. So the utilitarians, they like to say, well, your child is not really more special than all these other children elsewhere. But in any world based on decentralized incentives, you have to let people pursue their own interests, their own ties, prioritize their own family members and friends. That's part of how you get decentralization. And if you don't understand the value of decentralization, that might seem unjust to you. Like, oh, how can you focus on your own kid? You could like throw that kid away or sell it and use the receipts from the sale of your baby to support, 8 people in some very poor country. But you can't run a world that way. I think it's deeply immoral and also impractical. So the Austrian understanding of the role in prices and selfish motives and decentralized knowledge in getting to a better outcome for virtually everyone, that's the key here that bridges the gap and ought to allow a utilitarian to prioritize his or her family and friends.
Let's go to a roundup question, and I want to emphasize the idea of economic stagnation, especially in the Western world, in Europe, where you see a lot of economic stagnation, maybe some countries with 2 or 3 lost decades even.
More to come.
And more to come? Well, tell us why. Why more to come?
Again, it depends exactly on which country you have in mind, but most of Western Europe is too highly regulated, has taxes that are too high, has too much government spending. The countries have relatively low levels of ambition. The European Union is often a stifling bureaucracy, though it does have some other advantages, like freer trade. And there's just a general sense of malaise that has set in, fairly pessimistic life attitudes about what is possible. And all this means you get like a 1% rate of economic growth. Maybe if you're lucky, the age pyramid is inverting, so there's many more old people. That will make the social welfare states much harder to pay for. And because the labor markets are often not that free, it's much harder to absorb immigrants. So say Muslims in the United States is really not an economic problem. Like they have higher per capita income, I believe, than my own group, right. Irish Americans. But Muslims in Europe, again, depending where you look, but in many parts of Europe, England, it is an economic and political problem. So the freer society is going to be better at a whole bunch of things. But if I had to point to the single biggest difference between US and Western Europe, it's level of ambition. It's not even like government spending. Just how the people think, feel, and what their values are.
Some people argue that polarization is responsible for economic stagnation. I'm not agreeing with this view necessarily. Yeah. You talked about polarization, but very interesting. Well, was the world easier 40 years ago? But you talked about the benefits of polarization. And this is a quote, I think, from your blog. Look at Germany, which had non-ideological and non-polarized politics. They got every decision wrong. Is there a benefit to polarization? Should we not be afraid of like a politically more polarized society?
Well, we should be afraid, but there's a big benefit. It may not work out always, but polarization forces you to slug it out. It's like in a marriage. Sometimes you need a fight to get back on the same page. And the fight's not pleasant. Yes, you should be afraid of the fight. Sometimes, the fights can lead to couples splitting up. But you can't just let everything fester and pretend everything's fine. So right now, the US is in a period of turmoil, I would say. I have genuine concerns about who's going to win all the fights. But I understand we need to have those fights. And I actually think it's going to work out okay. That we'll make enough of the right decisions because it all will be put on the table. And there are enough good and smart people in my country and in most countries where this will happen. And I think Germany, too, will be forced to come around by their own lassitude and mistakes. Things will get to a crisis point. They will have the argument. It will be much later than it should have been. But I even think they're going to set things right in due time, sooner or later, probably later.
They talking about banning a political party, no?
AFD, yeah. That would be a big mistake because AFD, while I do not at all like them, they're forcing issues onto the table. And I say try to beat them using ideas. Have some faith in the marketplace of ideas and in human reason and in the values of your own people. Once you implicitly declare you don't have that belief, it could get much worse than AFD.
Well, talking about ideas and the market for ideas, let's go to some concluding remarks. Do you have any suggestions or advice to young Guatemalans and also for Guatemala as a country? What should we do and what should Guatemalan youngsters, hopefully ambitious youngsters, do in the near future?
I've only been to Guatemala 4 times, and there's much I do not understand about here. My sense is in the external world, your successes have been underrated, and I have the suspicion that internally, you might be too pessimistic or not understand the full potential. So you're doing pretty well right now. You're having growth rates in the range of 4%. It's been the case for some number of years. I looked up your average growth rate over the last 22 years. It's 3.5%. It could be a lot better, but it's better than most countries. So you're one of the relative successes. Still a democratic country. I know there's been turmoil that's so far proven robust. I mean, you're on a good track. So just see the potential in yourself as individual or as a series of cultures, as a country. I think very, very good things can happen here, and we've seen it underway already.
So let's be optimistic, not pessimistic, about Guatemala, AI, and the future of education. Thank you very much, Tyler.
My pleasure.
Great having you here, and thank you as well.